Welcome to Face Forward, the podcast, the series that takes you behind the scenes of the riveting world of clinical trial management. I am your host, Valerie Paolella, and I am thrilled to be your guide on this journey through the nuances of planning, executing, and navigating the clinical research landscape. With us today is an experienced associate director with more than 20 years' experience in the industry. Join us as we dive into risk-based monitoring. We will be exploring three crucial points in our discussion: the three types of clinical monitoring, best practices and challenges, and assembling the RBM A-Team. Let's extend our warmest welcome to Innovaderm's Associate Director in Clinical Trial Management, Valerie Paolella.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here. Before we get into it, actually, let me start by saying that while a risk-based approach to monitoring was introduced over 10 years ago with FDA's guidance to industry, it was left to sponsors and CROs to decide how to implement it. I've had a chance to see sponsors that are more risk tolerant than others. So as CROs, we have to vary our approach. At the end of the day, though, the goal is always the same, and that is to have high quality, reliable data and protect patient safety, no matter the risk-based decisions that you're putting into the program.
Great. So now that we have the table set, let's get into it. How do you perform monitoring on a risk-based trial?
Well, that's a good question. And for us, it's three types of monitoring: on-site monitoring, remote monitoring, and central monitoring. On-site monitoring is very well understood. It's been around many decades. CRAs have to review data that is the source in its original format. Still, we use a lot of paper, moving towards more electronic data capture of source. On-site monitoring allows CRAs to review the processes by which sites collect data, and it allows us to review that regulations and GCPs are being maintained. As an example, in the informed consent process, why e-consent is coming in, we're seeing it more and more, but by and large, consenting is done basically in a paper format. And so by being on site, we can visualize the signatures, we can see the timing of things through a medical chart. And so really being on site permits CRAs to verify that the subject's rights were maintained that way. The second type of monitoring is remote monitoring. It's a targeted review of data off-site. So it's complemented with our data management edit checks. But thanks to technology and access to different platforms, really we have to make better use of our ability to see data in real time. And especially after the pandemic, limiting access to sites and travel, really a remote monitoring visit can be actually quite beneficial. It helps us address concerns of the sites, keep data cleaning going between on-site visits. The third type of clinical monitoring that feeds into our risk-based approach is a centralized monitor. This type of monitoring, people confuse sometimes with remote, but it's actually very different. Our central monitors don't perform any on-site monitoring at all. They're dedicated to running statistical programs. They analyze data. They provide like a bird's eye view of subject data, site data, and study level data. They're picking up early signals with the review of data outliers and trends and duplicates. We're measuring a standard set of variables, of course, so protocol deviations, query aging, data entry delays. But using our dermatology experience, we can also develop key risk indicators, KRIs, that are based on study endpoints. So one area that we often cross-check for discrepancies is, when dermatologists are trying to convert their normal practice to study-specific worksheets or questionnaires, there we'll see some transcriptions and those types of errors that have occurred. Central monitoring is a very targeted review. And for us as clinical trial managers, it gives us insights into the data. It pinpoints higher risk sites that need further follow-up or to be escalated. And an example of what we would do when we would see that a higher risk site is that we'd have a bigger on-site presence with our CRAs.
And could you give our audience an example of a KRI in central monitoring?
When it comes to a key risk indicator, one great example is from when we're doing AD or eczema studies. We often use an EASY score, and this score, we see a lot of issues with it with inter-rater reliability. So part of our mandate in central monitoring is that we would collect the rater information and review the easy scores across the different raters. And in this way, if there's important variance, we can raise our concerns there.
Okay, so how would we integrate them all?
Now, that's a great question. This is where it all rolls up to the clinical trial manager, whose job it is to decipher all of the pieces of information from the central monitor's analytics and the observations from our CRAs. And we put it all together to make a targeted decision.
I see. Okay, moving on here, what would be the key steps in executing an RBM plan?
Well, from the onset, we get medical, scientific, and operational functional teams to come together early to highlight risks and mitigation strategies. And from there, we develop our plans. For us, the first key plan, of course, is the monitoring plan. In it, we detail the critical data points that we've highlighted and what should be source data verified. The monitoring plan will also determine the monitoring frequency, but we have to leave some flexibility to adjust, based on risk criteria. The risk criteria we've defined based on the initial risk assessment. And of course, on an ongoing basis, we'll track that against our tools. The centralized monitoring plan for us is a separate document. And this is the document that details those key risk indicators that will be reviewed and aggregated. And it lays out a frequency for review, for trending, and it sets the thresholds for reporting and highlights an escalation pathway to take when things are flagging.
And what would you say are some of the best practices in executing RBM?
Well, I think that having an on-site presence is absolutely necessary. So going too infrequently to sites can also be a pitfall. There's some issues, for example, if it's related to an investigational product delivery, if it's something complex like an infusion or even something simple you think of as a topical application, if issues come up because of the delivery at the site and it's not seen, that would affect your primary endpoint of your study. And also in dermatology studies specifically, we often use scales or questionnaires that can be subjective and require as much standardization as possible. Face-to-face discussions with CRAs are important to maintain that site engagement and allows for a CRA to have oversight of the quality of the data.
Okay, so what would be some challenges that could be considered when executing RBM?
Honestly, it's the resistance to change. Sites are bombarded with having to learn new systems and asked by CRAs to meet with them remotely. They have to adapt to a different working method. On-site visits, they have down to a science. But with risk-based monitoring, it's non-standardized. One sponsor to another could be implementing it differently. And then people at sites are destabilized. They want a routine. They want to know that their CRA is coming every 4 weeks and I can set my watch to it. But when it comes to risk-based monitoring, they don't know what to expect. So really that's how I would address it. Developing either some training material or establishing a rapport with the sites early on to ensure that they have an understanding of your expectations and also give them a chance to tell you about their experiences with risk-based monitoring and maybe their fears. It's really about setting expectations.
Okay, so moving on here to the team structure, what in your opinion are the key factors to consider in making the monitoring team successful?
Well, we work with experienced staff, and even then, the key is communication. A monitor on site, a remote monitor, a central monitor, we all have to support each other, ask the right questions, lead people to the right area of concern, and then, based on their role, they have to address it differently. As a CTM, we're constantly communicating with each of these people on the team, and we're making decisions. So the right information has to be brought in at the right time. That's the key.
And what would be the challenges?
Well, risk-based monitoring builds flexibility into the monitoring process, but not everyone feels comfortable with that level of unknown in their day-to-day. People who monitor trials are detailed, they're diligent, they are driven to collecting data at its highest quality. So I think empowering them to focus on their roles is important to overcome challenges. On-site CRAs need to focus on the review of process. Remote CRAs need to focus on data entry quality. And central monitors need to focus on their trending. This allows for a full picture to come together.
So this brings our interview to an end. It was such a pleasure having you today. Thank you for answering all my questions and giving all this insight to our audience.
Thank you so much. This was really fun.
As we conclude another illuminating episode of Face Forward, we find ourselves at the crossroads of science and progress. Remember that behind the jargon and statistics lie stories of unwavering commitment, meticulous observation, and the pursuit of evidence that shapes our understanding of health and disease. Stay at the forefront of knowledge and innovation and follow Face Forward on your preferred platform. My name is Valerie Kovney. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.